Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a very special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Film Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew. As always, that's everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, though, is given away, and it's titled that I'm here to talk off the stories of films, and I tend to talk about development stories, production stories, marketing stories, release stories, all those ingredients, really, that go towards making the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. This podcast, however, is a slightly different one to usual. It's one of my occasional special episodes where I bring in a guest to talk about their body of work. And I mean, this is a goosebump and a half episode for me because as long as I can remember, I've been a huge fan of Aardman and, of course, the work of the brilliant four-time Oscar winner, Nick Park. So earlier this year in 2023, when this has been recorded, a conversation went backwards and forwards about Nick Park possibly coming on the podcast. It was a bit of a pinch myself moment, but he's come through, and this is what you're about to hear. A conversation that's set up just in small part to mark the 30th anniversary of Wallace and Gromit, The Wrong Trousers. As you're going to hear, I think it's probably Nick Park's favourite thing he's ever done. But I'm just going to give you just a couple of quick listening notes just ahead of just one or two of the things we're going to talk about. So Vision On, for instance, is a television programme that comes up early in the chat, which is a 1970s TV show that was demonstrating art and design to kids on British children's TV, and also through Vision On and its spiritual successor, Take Heart. That's where the character Morph came from, one of Aardman's very first, if not its first, iconic characters. And that was something, as you're about to hear, Nick Park really locked into. We talk about the Beano comic. If you don't know the Beano, it's published every week, and I really like the Beano, just wanted to give it a plug. Peter Lord and David Sproxton come up. They are the co-founders of Aardman. They also wrote a book on the history of Aardman, which I referred to a couple of times. We talk about another British TV children's show, The Blue Peter, a magazine programme that was hugely popular for a long time and is still going today. We talk about the film The Dark Crystal, directed by Jim Henson. That comes up. Ray Harryhausen hopefully needs little introduction, and if he does need an introduction, then you've got a treat ahead of you. That's all I'd say. One of the absolute masters of stop frame animation work. You see his work in things like Clash of the Titans, not the most recent one. A Grand Day Out is the very first Wallace and Gromit adventure, as you're about to hear. Jeffrey Katzenberg is a name that comes up. He was head of Disney for a long time, certainly on the animation side, and co-founded the DreamWorks SKG studio along with Steven Spielberg and David Geffen, and they went into competition with Disney, lured Aardman into what was a 5-picture agreement that was ended after 3. You'll also hear one or two bangs of cups on desks. I just want to point out this is a very fine Shaun the Sheep mug that Nick Park is drinking out of. But that is as much setup really as I want to do, because the treasure is just listening to this man talk. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to play you just 2 or 3 clips from his work, from Chicken Run, from the film Early Man, and from Wallace and Gromit, The Wrong Trousers, and then we're straight into my chat with Nick Park, the other side of this.
Ooh, challenge the champions.
You'll leave my people alone, as agreed.
Yes, just say the words.
Not me! I forfeit the game and volunteer myself for the mines.
Attack! Nice plan! Finally, something we agree on.
Oh. It's my turn for breakfast this morning, Gromit. I like a 3-minute egg. Steady on. Wow! Gromit! Oh! Oh! Well, that went as well as could be expected, didn't it?
So that is, well, it's a collection of clips from the extraordinary work of billion-time Oscar winner Nick Park. Maths was never my strong suit, but lots and lots of deserved awards. I'm absolutely thrilled that he's joining me for this Film Stories special In Conversation podcast. Nick Park, hello. How do we find you?
Oh, hello, Simon. Not bad, thanks. Yeah. End of the day, a bit tired with the scripting issues and stuff, but
I assume I'm not asking about scripting issues. I assume that's to do with the Wallace and Gromit film coming up that we're not allowed to talk about.
It is.
Should we acknowledge that up front? Can I change the subject then to your very fetching mug that you're drinking out of? I notice you're totally on brand.
Oh yes,
Sean the Sheep, superb. Yeah. I trust you didn't pay for that.
No, I didn't.
Excellent. There's so much I want to talk to you about, but I just wonder, can we go right back to your beginnings? Because I've been reading the foreword that you wrote to David Sproxton and Peter Lord's History of Aardman book, which was a really eye-opening read. But you let us in a little bit on the Nick Park before you were Nick Park, if you like, the Nick Park that we know. And you talk about a young man who was, I'm quoting you, who was obsessed with animation and making my own 8mm films at home. And you talked about, you draw your inspiration largely from TV, and in particular the TV show Vision On, of course, in the early 1970s. So can you just take me into your world as it was then, and those 8mm films, and these kind of TV shows that aren't around now, that were inspiring people like you to pick up a pen and pencil? Yes, or a pencil and paper even.
And whatever was around the house, really, that you could animate. But it goes back really to. I dreamt. I found out very early that I could draw well, and cartoons were my main thing. And first of all, I was just a massive fan of the Beano and the Dandy and all those comics, which were so British in their kind of values, and and I was obsessed with them, really. Read each one from cover to cover a million times, and I dreamt of being a Beano artist. And then I remember seeing things on TV in the 70s about there were film competitions where people had done animation, and Vision On, as you say, has had many examples of kind of almost do-it-yourself types of animation that were very accessible, whether they were pipe cleaner dolls moving around, or simple drawings or cutouts, or and Morph, of course, or what the predecessor of Morph, the stuff that Peter Lord and Dave Sproxton did in their early days. And so I just drank all this in, really. And when I found out that my mum's home movie camera, a Bell & Howell 8mm, standard 8mm, not even Super 8. Standard 8mm movie camera, Bell & Howell, could actually take one frame at a time. It had an animation button on it. When to someone here in Preston, I didn't know anyone who did animation or was interested even. So my dad, who was a photographer, told me how it's basically, he'd heard about it, and he told me how it's done, and he just said, have a go. And so I just got going with, felt cutouts, paper cutouts, you name it. I just started animating everything around, and there was plasticine in the house. And another thing that really inspired me was a lot of the work of Bob Godfrey and Rhubarb and Custard, and all those, because they looked so hand drawn, and he didn't care about the wobbliness. In fact, that was part of the style, and that was really inspiring. So I would see I suppose I was just. I would copy everything I saw, really, and have a go.
I hear that from screenwriters quite a lot, that they got started by just copying out another screenplay, just page for page, just to get the formatting and work out the beats of it all. But in your case, you were drawing by the sounds of it, you were drawing very early, and had a slightly different path opened up. It would have been more hand-drawn animation that you were pushing towards than the way you went down. Would that be fair? If that camera hadn't been discovered?
It was, to begin with. It was, and it was really, I was copying all these things. obviously, as a kid, you realise it takes a long time. So I would aspire to be a Disney artist, and
Yeah.
I would see something a short of Disney's that were always on BBC Two, and I would make my own story but do a bit of animation and then give up because it took so long. But I didn't have the proper equipment for that. Even the cells that they used to use.
Yeah.
Where you had to draw on one side and paint on the other. So I bought a whole roll of tracing paper and chopped it up and put my own peg bars in and made a peg bar out of 2 6-inch nails in a board. And
an odd question: does stuff like that teach you patience very early? Because that's the last thing kids tend to be, isn't it?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I think I do tend to. I've always chosen those things that take a long time.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's my part of my nature. I always used to love fishing. Sat there on the bank watching a float. Hoping, or bird watching, hoping that bird would appear.
And you also, I mean, I do want to name check it because you also touched on it there, the Beano, and you did get the chance to edit your own issue of the Beano, of course. But
yeah.
I mean, the thing from my point of view is lots of these touch points seem to have evolved or moved on. That the Beano is the only, to this at the point we're recording, it's the only children's magazine that is a comic in that form. All of the others now seem to be weighed down by a ton of free tat. Stuff like that, and the actual material is less of no. And likewise, those TV shows just seem to have been. I don't know. I think they've probably evolved into TikTok and things like that, which I'm not snobbish about. But I'm just curious what you think of the state of the influences compared to the ones that broke you in.
Of how it. Of how it is today.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the 10-year-old you was sat in front of all of this and you had that knack for drawing, if you'd feel the same way. Sort of impossible question. But
I know it's a good question though. Yeah, and also you tend to look at the era that you grew up in as the classic one, and all the best stuff was around, which it was. But yeah, I don't know if I think there's definitely less attention span today. I think. Because the TV seemed much more kind of eclectic, and they're a bit like you used to listen to an album, and there was other tracks on it that you might not have normally gone for, but you got to know them really well. And it's the same with a limited number of stations. You tended to watch all the stuff, all the documentaries, and between the programs that you wanted. I'm going off the subject.
No, this is really interesting stuff. I think a lot of this is quite core.
Like there was always like a 5 minutes before the news, all those programs before the news in the 70s on BBC. There'd be a couple of Laurel and Hardy films, or a Charlie Chaplin, or I remember there's one which was just for silent movies, and it was called Mad Movies or something, or and presented by somebody. But you get to see all this history of filmmaking. Yeah, but unless you go looking for it, you don't see it. Unless you're studying it.
I was coming to all of that in the early 80s, and Laurel and Hardy was an animated cartoon. By that point, that was the introduction to my generation, I think, to a lot of Laurel and Hardy. Yeah. I mean, the mechanics of it were fascinating, but it's interesting how it evolves.
Yes.
I'm really taken too by something you put in the book about you were watching a segment on Blue Peter. Where you saw Peter Lord and David Sproxton, of course, the founders of Aardman and the creators of Morph. And you talk, it almost feels like when you've talked about that and seeing the human beings behind this thing that you saw that you were so taken by, that was a moment where it was almost like an I could do that moment, or that feels reachable because there are human beings. Would that be fair?
I think it probably would be, actually. Yes, I do. I watched that clip on YouTube recently, actually, as well. Just great to see Peter Lord and Dave Sproxton so young and such obviously written script as well. But it was. I remember that it was that was in just as I was I was probably about 14 or 15, and I was just breaking into my own animation that was
Yeah.
that I was kind of making headway, and people were seeing it, and I was getting a thrill out of people's reactions to it. And then seeing that they were doing what I aspired to do, and they really inspired me. So when I actually did meet them, and I actually met Morph, and I dined out of that for a while, thinking this was like the pinnacle, just meeting them.
Yeah.
So, and for that to be on primetime kids TV as well was something. But yeah, they kind of summed everything up that I loved about animation. Creating little characters that were playing on primetime TV, and all very handmade. The way they showed you how to do it, that was certainly. I think it's the big appeal about things like Morph, because at the time, there was loads of other stuff, Disney or Warner Brothers, and lots of very funny or moving stuff. But it was because it was accessible that people recognised it as a piece of plasticine like we have in our house. And it's living and breathing, and it's characterful, and you can see the fingerprints. And I think that sort of made it kind of, yes, I can do that. I could do that maybe.
Well, I think all the evidence suggests you can do that. I don't think I'm going on a limb to say that.
Yeah, no, I mean back then.
But I mean, you, as I understand it, you first met Peter Lord by approaching him at the London Film Festival. That you kind of tracked him down. And I'm just wondering, how old were you at that point? And I mean, that's a bold, brave thing to do, to go up to someone, your hero. And I'm just wondering what that conversation was.
Yes, well, I'd been to art school by then, and I was in my first year at like a postgraduate at the National Film and TV School. Yeah. I was in my first year and went along to the London Film Festival, which had an evening of showing, British animation. And I remember being quite shy to go up to him, and when he was very friendly, and I saw he had a Morph badge on. And I remember thinking, wow, having a badge of your own character, that's so cool. And it was a bit of merch,
The reason I ask that is because presumably people do that to you now.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what the reverse of it is, that you've seen the wide-eyed version of it, of someone plucking up the courage to speak to someone who inspires them. And I appreciate you're a modest person. It can't be the most comfortable question, but I'm just wondering how the reverse feels, that if you still, when someone does that to you, you remember that 16, 17-year-old who had to pluck up the courage.
Yeah, I do. It reminds me actually of, because I went to school with film school with Mark Baker, who created Peppa Pig. Yeah. And I remember we were at that same festival a couple of years later, and we were coming out of the screening saying, "Oh, I hate that new whoever's film it was." Someone quite probably really well-known animator. And then we sort of laughed and said, "We know we've made it when we overhear someone saying, 'I hate that new Nick Park film.'"
Oh no, has that happened to you? I hope not.
No, it hasn't actually. No.
Thank goodness for that. The other thing I wasn't aware of digging into your past is you managed to get a placement on the set of The Dark Crystal. For those who are unfamiliar, the Jim Henson film, The Dark Crystal. And I read a biography of Jim Henson where it talked about the physical building of that film, for want of a better way of putting it. And I'm just wondering, I didn't know this about you at all. I'm just wondering, how old were you at that point, and what's it like walking onto a set like that? Because that feels quite unique, even then, quite unique.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was actually in first year at film school again. Actually, so it was around 1980, 81. I can't remember what year the film was made, but it would be.
It was a year or two after that, wasn't it? It came out 82,
yeah, yeah. So probably 81. I was just a student, and someone who had a contact with the production said, "Oh, we've been offered a placement for a student. Anyone want to take it? And I was one of the first people asked, and I just went, yeah, sure. Yeah. And I did 3 weeks on it, making tea for the special effects team.
Yeah.
I did get to see, they showed me around. This is at Boreham Wood.
Yeah.
Looked around. Amazing. I mean, first of all, I remember just walking around the studio. It's like one of those films, like where you walk around the Hollywood studios and you see, like there's a bit of set from Star Wars and a bit of set from. I remember on the door, like private keep out, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I thought, boy, is that some kind of biblical film or something? I didn't, no one knew what it was at the time. And it was also kind of amazing, all these secrets behind doors and loads of, set building and props departments making stuff. But yeah, I went in and watched while they were shooting sometimes. And it was great to see, that after doing a take, you'd hear cut, and then all the puppeteers would like keep going and do kind of gag stuff and start laughing and what have you, and saying stuff off screen, once the cameras had stopped rolling. And
I mean, you've talked about influences, certainly across interviews that you've done, the likes of Tom and Jerry, the likes of the Beano. Where does someone like Jim Henson stand then? Someone who just had a complete vision for that and just ploughed on, even when lots of people were advising him otherwise.
I mean, I don't know a lot about the personal history of
but just him as a kind of someone to you, because it sounds like you were particularly wide-eyed on that.
Yes. I mean, they did. They did strike me, Jim Henson and Frank Oz, as a kind of model, really. That I saw Peter Lord and Dave Sproxton as these people who are kind of cutting their own groove and doing a form of Jim Henson, Frank Oz, creating these unique characters and great comedy. It's just iconic now. But I did see Pete and Dave as that, but much earlier in their career, sort of thing. The potential when I first joined Aardman, I never really met properly Jim Henson, or just in passing.
Yeah,
I think I was introduced and he said hi or something. But I did meet Frank Oz a few years later. Amazing. And I was too shy to go up to them. But I met him at a film festival, and I told him that I was a student on the Dark Crystal, and he said, you should have come up and said hi. So, at the time you think, oh no, I can't do that. And,
I mean, Peter Lord and David Sproxton give you a whole chapter just specifically to you in their book. And they describe the 1985 version of Nick Park in a very charming way. They say you were living a Spartan existence in a no man's land between student life and part-time employment, broke on the dole, living in Cricklewood, northwest London, who could barely afford the 60p tube ticket to the centre of town. And that's almost like the eve of what was about to come. And I'm just wondering what your perspective was on that, how you felt, if you felt that a breakthrough was coming, or kind of what kept you going.
Yeah, well, I was making a grand day out at films. I'd run out of time. It was back then. It was a 3-year course, which isn't anymore. It's 2 years now. But a lot of students then went over their time, and the film school was a fairly sort of relaxed and liberal place, and they let students carry on and finish their productions off their own bat and sort of thing. And I was on the dole for a year and a half afterwards, because I guess what drove me really was that I felt I was making something special. Yeah. And just in myself, I sort of knew that this is what I need to do. And I was getting quite down really in London, and without money. It's not a great place to live when you've got no money. And but I wanted to keep going in the film school, and it was just going to take me forever. So anyway, I was the one ray of light was that I was getting phone calls from Dave Sproxton and Peter Lord saying I'd met them, they'd given a talk at the film school, and they'd seen what I was doing, and they were expanding and saying, why don't you come and worked for us in the summer, which I did a couple of summers, and working on Morph and things. And then they were expanding and saying, "Why don't you come full time?" And I kept resisting and saying, "I want to direct, and I've got this vision." And so eventually they said, "Well, why don't you work for us part time, and we'll help you finish your film?" And the film school agreed to that, and so I moved to Bristol, and that's one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Well, they do say that you turned them down at first. I mean,
yeah,
it could have been a very different path.
I know.
But you said there you felt you had something special. And I wonder if you can take me into that a little bit. I mean, is it a thing with animation that, you can look around and see no one's done what I'm doing in quite the way I'm doing it? Was there kind of sense of that?
It was very much that, actually. Yeah, I felt I was, there's obviously, there was lots of, stop motion animation, puppet animation, whatever you want to call it. But it tended to be mostly either the most artistic end was like Eastern European stuff that was on BBC Two a lot, or National Film Board of Canada, like, short films. Some great stuff that really influenced me. Or it was like more little stuff, serious stuff for television. Very much aimed at kids. And I think I wanted to. I loved what Aardman were doing with stuff that was a bit more grown up, but also I loved the quality of it, that you could, as a filmmaker, that you could create a whole world that you could enter into. So it wasn't all like a lot of kids' stuff was obviously on a stage set, and a lot of the Eastern European stuff, it was very much influenced by theatre or puppet theatre. So, and I wanted to, as a filmmaker, be able to film one way and then have an opposite shot where you're looking the other way, and you're still in the film, in the world. And so that three-dimensionality really, and the lighting and everything, the drama of a movie, but in this medium that it seems to be always seen as for kids, take the audience somewhere on a journey.
I mean, better people than me have observed how well your films are shot and how cinematic they are and how they're framed and the angles that you choose. What were you watching around this time? What were the films you were growing up with that were heavily influencing the way you shot your films? It's funny. I mean, I was a big fan of animation, and I could give you quite a list. And I was influenced by Ray Harryhausen. And his early work on the Mother Goose stories, the Hansel and Gretel. He did these string of fairy tales before the dinosaurs and before the mythical creatures, and all sorts really from those. Oh, the names escape me now. Early animation, early stop motion that you saw from the 1940s, and all sorts of stuff actually. But I greatly influenced by live action. I think that's part of the value of going to art school and doing a film course and then film school, is that you got a lot of film history that was very inspiring, and watched Hitchcock movies endlessly. I did wonder that,
Orson Welles, whoever, various filmmakers from all international from all over the place, really, all over the world.
And is that something you're still actively doing? It's like if we came round to your house on a Friday night, would you have got a nice bottle of wine out and be watching a new film?
Many times, and obviously there's lots of series stuff on at the moment, isn't there? And on streaming as well. And that the problem is with that takes up a lot of your time.
Doesn't it?
I'd rather watch films, to be honest, than series. Although I have got hooked a couple of times on different things.
One of the interesting things that Guillermo del Toro has been talking about recently is something that's always seemed quite at the heart of your work, because when he was talking about approaching the animation on Pinocchio, he was talking about the extra frames, that if he got a character, I heard him give a talk on this, if he got a character who was reaching for something, they would add in the extra frames of them just leaning back as a human would do. And just like stretching their arm in a slightly funny way and putting some characterization into that. And he talked about how that just that single decision would add months to one animator's life. just with the work that they had to do. But it's that level of detail, even when you were doing a Grand Day Out by yourself, pretty much by yourself, that's always been integral. Was the temptation there never there for the shortcut? I mean, what was it? You talked about you've always liked things that take a long time. But I just wonder, when you're young, was it ever tempting just to take the slightly easier way out?
I guess when you're making films yourself, the temptation is greater.
Yeah.
Because you have to create it all, and but I think because editing is a kind of a thing that develops more as you go, an awareness of editing, and at the beginning you tend to just overshoot really, and things last far too long, and as I've directed more, on a more, full-time basis, not as a student, I tend to love to cover myself because of the edit, because I do believe a lot of the work happens in the editing room, and that things are really put. I know the animation happens on the floor, but on the studio floor, and without that you can't edit. But the editing is a really key kind of nerve center of the creative process, where as shots come in and you try them in this way, and I love to be able to have some leeway to edit, and even in stop motion where it's all pretty much planned out on storyboards, but still, I've always found this, if you just ask for an extra half second even on the end of a shot, let the character actually go out of the shot, don't just stop before they get out and stuff like that. It gives you quite a lot of freedom with how you can reorder the shots if you want to, or just create a stronger bit of narrative, or a stronger joke, or by just trying the shots in a different order.
Because when people sometimes talk about adding an extra frame or two to the end of the shot, it's to do with comedy timing. I've heard that quite a lot of comedy directors. But you stand there like it's almost as much for drama as well, and just tone, and just giving you some more options.
Yes, it's both really. Drama and comedy. And just timing, whether it's for drama or comedy. Very important. There's nothing worse than you find yourself stuck because the character didn't leave shot, or or there was just, you needed that few more frames.
Yeah, and you've been in that position presumably.
Yes. What's quite difficult as well, if the animator has put a blink near the end of the shot, and it's just like 8 frames off the end of the shot, and there's something about blinks, you need a clear kind of second or something, or at least a clear half second, otherwise the blink upsets the edit. It's a really funny thing.
Interesting. So are you the person then who goes down to the floor and says, I need another second, otherwise my blink's not going to work? Is that?
Yeah, I am really.
I did see you at Aardman when you were directing Early Man, which is the only film you've directed by yourself. And I just there was a little bit of me that wondered if you just really wanted to be on the floor. Because if that was your handpiece on that, and Early Man dragged you away from that a little bit. I really like Early Man a lot, but I just wondered if you were as comfortable in that position in the end.
No, it was different actually. It was a different experience. I was much more in the editing room with the editor and director, and I had 2 wonderful directors of animation that I would brief, and they'd go onto the floor and do what have you. We'd have quite thorough conversations about exactly what's wanted. But I did miss it. I do love being there on the floor with the animator, working it through and directing it, and doing. We do like a live action video of ourselves.
I've seen some of those.
That's the way that I try to get across, what's in my mind, to the animator, not to copy it, to be realistic or anything, but it just helps you to get across what's going through your head and what's important. So you can watch the video back and you can say, as long as you hit this expression, or this timing, whatever it is, make it this big. Don't do it any less, or make this subtle, whatever it is.
I mean, just jumping time frames again completely. I mean, the early part of your Aardman career and Aardman giving you the scope to finish A Grand Day Out, and then Creature Comforts landing as well. The one event that just seems, again from the outside looking in, to be a turning point was the Bristol Animation Festival in 1989, when both of these were being shown on a big screen for the first time. And I don't know if you'd seen your films on a big screen with an audience before, but I just wonder if that was a moment where this suddenly felt like a career, because that's where you met Ray Harryhausen, wasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, amazing.
I mean, everything happened around that time. It was, I mean, I was enjoying my time at Aardman, and I was making Grand Day Out by that point, I'd half of the time at film school, and then at Aardman, altogether, it had taken me 7 years to get to there. And in a gap before, I had to wait while the sound studio became available at film school, so I could go back and mix the sound for Grand Day Out. And in the meantime, I worked on a series we were working on at Aardman called Lip Sync, of which my contribution was a 5-minute short called Creature Comforts.
Yes.
And so I finished those 2 films at the same time, and they were both in the animation festival. And first of all, I had to go and back then you had to go to the lab and get the film, back on 35mm. And I collected the film of Grand Day Out, and it's still wet, and I took it to the Arnolfini in Bristol to be screened. And just spent weeks in the sound studio, with sound guys doing the sound. First screening at the Arnolfini, and the projectionist had forgotten to turn the sound up.
No.
And I was in the middle of a row and I couldn't get out. And it was like nightmare. You could only just hear the sound. But anyway, it worked out well after that. But then there was another screening for Creature Comforts at the Watershed in Bristol. And I didn't realise that Ray Harryhausen was in the screening. And afterwards, he came walking right up to me. And he was my idol from when I was 13. And he just came up to me and said, "That was the greatest claymation I've ever seen," and shook my hand. And I was completely gobsmacked that he'd seen my work, and not only seen it, but said that about it.
I mean, I obviously on a podcast, the pictures don't come across, but the look on your face, even it's almost like you've got goosebumps even recalling that moment.
Yeah.
I mean, quite so. I mean, was that the moment? I'm loath to reduce life down to just individual moments, but I just wondered if that was a moment where you just thought, "This is me now. This is my time."
Suddenly, I was, I was somewhat someone in the animation world. I've been enjoying helping out on Morph and the Sledgehammer video for Peter Gabriel. All that sort of thing. Pee Wee Herman, job we did in America, various things. But I was kind of like an animator or an assistant animator on everything. So I had this thing cooking all the time, and I knew it was going to do something, but I knew I'd never seen anything like it. That thing that kept me going with Grand Day Out. And then Creature Comforts kind of surprised me as well, really, because it took 3 months to shoot that. That's the crazy thing, is that I'd spent 7 years on A Grand Day Out, and Creature Comforts was out at the same time, and they both got nominated for the BAFTAs, and Grand Day Out won. Then they both got nominated in the Oscars, and Creature Comforts won. And it was like suddenly Creature Comforts started winning everything. And it kind of pipped Grand Day Out at the post, and Grand Day Out then became more of a slow burn thing. And Wallace and Gromit, that was more kind of something that was slowly kind of taking off in the background.
I mean, did it feel like at one point it was going to be the film that was never going to be finished, A Grand Day Out?
It did.
What did year 5 feel like?
Oh yeah. Well, I remember going to see my friends. This was 1985. I went to see my friends, David Fine and Alison Snowden, who are animators. They're Oscar winners with Bob and Margaret. And, cartoons and great style. And I stayed with them in Montreal back then, and took the film with me, and they showed me around the National Film Board, and we showed my unfinished film, A Grand Day Out. And everyone, everyone was very kind about it. And they said, but somebody said to me, how are you going to finish it? And then David and Alison saying, it's going to take you another 9 years looking at your script. You've got to somehow contain it. Just think of an ending that somehow wraps it all up. So I went back to Bristol and decided to do that. So, there was going to be a big scene on the moon, which was a bit of I guess it's a bit of a spoof of Star Wars, where Wallace and Gromit went into like a McDonald's on the moon, and it was going to be like the bar scene in Star Wars, but it was going to take too long, and Wallace was going to I won't go into it, but he was going to find himself locked up in prison in like a spaghetti western sort of prison on the moon.
I mean, I love the bits of Aardman that get very, very close to spoofing real life as well. I still remember how the first press shot from the Shaun the Sheep movie had Costly Coffee in the background. How disappointed I was when I saw the final film and you changed it to Gulper or something like that. I didn't realise. I mean, with all due respect to you, you looked absolutely shell shocked at the 1991 Oscars. When your name was read out. And I didn't realise it was Woody Woodpecker, of all people, who read your name out, which must have been quite surreal as well.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, were you as shell-shocked as you looked? I mean, had you got any idea?
Well, I'd never been to the West Coast of America before, never mind to Hollywood and the Oscars. It was completely mind-blowing, to be honest. And I was nervous beyond, I can't describe how nervous I was, because here was me who was, I didn't feel part of the film industry, really. I felt this little cottage industry, in Bristol, making animation in the dark, and here you are in the spotlight, and there's every famous face you've ever heard of walking past you and sitting nearby. Dustin Hoffman walks past, Burt Lancaster,
Good grief.
It was just incredible. And then I got my Oscar, actually, in Woody Woodpecker, but also the humans that did it were Chevy Chase and Martin Short. So it was just amazing. And and you were aware that there's a billion people watching back then anyway. I'm not sure. I think it's more now, but I'm not sure what the ratings are. But
we're rewatching as well. I mean, the clip's still available and now. I mean, it just kind of lives on forever. So, I mean, the Wrong Trousers is just hitting an anniversary, just as we're talking now. And I know, I mean, it's incredible. I know it was in your life quite a lot more, but I remember watching it the first time it showed, and it's just like, what the hell was that? And so I just wonder how you felt going into that you'd carried A Grand Day Out for so long by yourself, and now this was a lot more collaborative, right down from the writing to building the film and onwards. So, I mean, where were you at the launch pad of that? Where was your head?
Gosh, gosh, I know, because A Grand Day Out, the awareness of Wallace and Gromit was more of a slow burn thing, to take on its popularity. There were fans of it around, but it was, first of all, the film school, National Film and TV School. They sold it with my approval, sold it to Channel 4 to start with, and they gave a couple of screenings, and then we got called. There was a producer who was setting up, trying to make animation a bigger thing in Bristol, bigger than Aardman, but to include us as well. A guy called Colin Rose, and he came to us and asked if we'd be interested, what we would be interested in developing, really, with the BBC. And it was mentioned. I think that I would love to do another Wallace and Gromit. I'd love to keep them going somehow and do more adventures with Wallace and Gromit. And he got us a meeting with Alan Yentop, who was the head of BBC Two. And we walked in his office, and within a few minutes, it was like, great, let's get this thing going. Another Wallace and Gromit film.
That quick?
Yeah, it was. And they bought a Grand Day Out off Channel 4, and because they wanted the whole brand. And so we went back and looked for writers, and talked about how we would do this. I had quite a few ideas already, and that's when I was introduced to Bob Baker, who was a writer on Doctor Who. Things, lived in Bristol, and it all went from there, really. I went to him with this sketchbook of ideas about these kind of techno trousers idea, and this penguin lodger coming to stay, and things like that. I did actually have some ideas for the train chase as well, but I didn't know if these ideas would fit together or not into a story.
Yeah. I mean, I read various stories of you coming up with ideas and where they're coming from, and they seem to involve Bristol pubs a reasonable amount. But I've got stories of like Curse the Were-Rabbit being pitched as a vegetarian horror movie, Chicken Run being pitched as the Great Escape with chickens. Yeah, just kind of that. And so it's impossible to ask someone, where do your ideas come from? But I just wonder, what environment serves your ideas best? Because I don't see you in a boardroom throwing these things out. And the fact that you were sat in the pub and just talking about quite a lot of that, is that where the sparks tend to come? Just collaborating with other people and just having a eureka moment?
That's a big part of it. I love collaborating and working with writers. I tend to have a lot of ideas myself. Often the germ of the idea is, I tend to have come up with like Chicken Run or the different Wallace and Gromit films, Were-Rabbit. But yeah, like Were-Rabbit, we were in the I can't remember the name of the pub now.
That's all right, we won't hold you to the pub.
Yeah, it was around the corner from our studios anyway. It's closed now, actually, but it's not the pub, I mean, not the studios. And we were there thinking, we were trying to think of ideas, because BBC Books, which existed then, wanted to commission some Wallace and Gromit little books for kids. And we sat down thinking, we wrote down a list of different story ideas. And I had this sketch in my book of, and I don't know why I'd drawn it, but of Wallace turning into a rabbit, like in stages, like a werewolf. And that was, that's right. One of the idea we're discussing was that Wallace and Gromit have a rabbit problem. They're trying to grow veg and rabbits, so Wallace is going to invent traps and stuff. And for some reason, I'd drawn Wallace turning into a rabbit, and that's what sparked it. And we suddenly thought, well, this has legs. This is not a small kids book. This is a movie. So we kind of kept it on the back burner, and later, after Chicken Run, pitched it to Jeffrey Katzenberg at DreamWorks.
I mean, first, on the one hand, it all sounds like an amazing scam to get it all on expenses, and I obviously respect that. But I mean, you mentioned Jeffrey Katzenberg and Chicken Run, and of course Aardman doing its deal with DreamWorks. And I mean, just jumping ahead, I mean, Peter Lord and David Sproxton, and I've asked David Sproxton about this as well, were open in their book about, they describe it as Katzenberg's often tempestuous personality is the beautiful way that they phrase it. This big Hollywood studio chief landing at Bristol Airport and hobnobbing it over to Aardman. But it also suggested in that book that Katzenberg was really good with you, that he looked after you, and that there was kind of a good relationship between the two. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, it was pretty much that, really. I got on with him very well. He had great respect, for. In fact, I met him years earlier. Actually, it was when I was first got an Oscar, for Creature Comforts.
Yeah,
and when we were kind of offered loads of like looking around studios in LA and stuff, I got an invite to Disney. And Jeffrey was the head of Disney Animation at that point.
Yeah.
I got an invite. I was shown around Disney, and then oh, Mr. Katzenberg would love to meet you. And so I went up to his office to meet him and sat down. Amazing to meet the head of Disney, you know. He just said, you know, I love your work and everything, and I'd love to work with you one day on something, you know. And that's how it ended, really. You know, Disney were in contact with us for a few years after that, trying to get deals with us, and maybe we could make some kind of films together.
Yeah,
I think it was all spurred on by Jeffrey, you know. But then it really happened when he broke away from Disney and formed DreamWorks with Spielberg and Geffen, and then they came back afresh, you know, like wanting to get people on board and make films. It felt like there were filmmakers then, and you know, wanting to they wanted like a new slate and a new outlook. So they were approaching people like ourselves.
Because the Wallace and Gromit work you were doing, I mean, the wrong trousers and a close shave. I think you've been relatively candid. You were getting bigger and bigger with them. You were ramping up and getting more ambitious, and it was almost like you were building towards a film. But was that set in your head that early on?
Yes. Well, thinking about it, I mean, because a Grand Out was a kind of separate beast, because it was partly at college and then part time for over 4 years. It was not a commercially viable model for making a film. So when it came to Wrong Trousers, that was more like, now this is a film. We have to have a proper budget and a proper production and a schedule and everything. And it was a small team. There was most of the animation was done by me and my fellow animator Steve Box, who was mostly responsible for the Penguin, for Feathers McGraw. And at the time, I wouldn't let anyone do Wallace and Gromit. I was a bit protective, and also I was scared the style might change, which tends to happen with different animators. But anyway, Steve did get to do Wallace and Gromit, and I did get to do Feathers McGraw. But that was the balance, really. But Steve did most of that, and he did a fantastic job, obviously. But there was there was two lighting camera guys, Dave Redette and Tristan Oliver, and a handful of model makers and set designers and set builders.
I mean, you've explained how you did the extraordinary train chase in that film several times. So I won't ask you again, because I know the information's out there, and I still think it's the only piece of filmmaking I can think of where I look at it and just think I've got absolutely no idea how they do that, even though I've read how you did it. And you seem to do it with stuff I could go to Curry's to buy. I mean, that was the remarkable thing. But I just wonder about the problem solving element of it, because you say it's a small team there, and looking back at The Wrong Trouser, I watched it the other night for the umpteenth time, and something as simple as sliding him out of bed into the trousers, I mean, he's a few seconds of our screen time. I'm just wondering the problem solving of something like that I take for granted, because I can see that a train chase like that is off the chart. I mean, you're all mad as far as I'm concerned. But the matter of fact, taken for granted stuff, was that as taxing in its own way?
I mean, the whole, I think it's the thing about, because most of us had grown up doing animation, so it wasn't like something it wasn't a mystery to us, in that we were. And I think one of the attractions to doing animation is sort of the trickery, really, of how you can cheat things. Because as soon as you start animating, you realise there's lots of shortcuts you can take to make things look like they're happening when they're not. You know, for example, when Wallace goes into his trousers at the beginning, as you say, obviously it would be a waste of time to try and animate him frame by frame into a real pair of trousers. So it's like, if you do it quickly, you can just, at some point, as he's going into them, you can just replace those trousers with ones that are already on him, that are built in to his puppet, you know. So that it's all about illusion and trickery, really. And if you do it with the right inner style and in a right pace, the sound effect does half of the job as well.
That's the other thing I want to ask you about, actually, because I don't see you asked about this a lot. But I see you too, as much as an extraordinary director of films, part and parcel of that is an extraordinary director of sound. And not just the score for the score work that Julian Nott's been doing, but the detail on the individual sound effects feels as precise as the blinks that you were just talking about before. And you said a little while ago that you were 3 months in a sound booth getting the sound right. Can you just give me an insight into your view on that side of the job? Because I don't hear you talk about that.
No, and I'm very lucky to meet some great people way back from film school. You know, like you say, as well as Julian Knott, a great composer. But Adrian Rhodes was also a student who's done every Wallace and Gromit film.
Yeah,
and he was in charge of the sound, really. And also another student I'll mention, Danny Hambrook, who was more of a sound recordist. And but I think the way Adrian and Danny approach it, it's very much a character. You know.
Yeah.
It's a part of the animation, and we probably talked about it a bit and what the nature of the sound we want, and that it should have is it cartoony, like Tom and Jerry? Not really, because that's more like using musical instruments often as sound effects. This is much more like Foley, spot effects, and with a sort of a gravelly, a realistic feel with a touch of cartoon. That creates a nice feeling for the world. But like Wallace, it's a kind of it's everything's a bit ham-fisted and real, but not very real. It's not a documentary. So. But everything, the way you put a cup down, it probably has that kind of, but there might be something a little bit more attractive about it. I remember the guy. There was a Foley guy, the guy who does the sound effects. His name was Jack Straw. I remember from Wrong Trousers, and he spent ages doing all Feathers McGraw's footsteps along the street, along the floor. I remember him with a pair of rubber gloves on different stone surfaces and wood surfaces, just doing that with his rubber gloves on his hands, and he just watched the film like that for hours.
I mean, it's just analog problem solving by the sounds of it, which goes right back to you watching Vision On and seeing this kind of analog piece of plastic just moving around. I mean, scarily, I'm coming relatively close to the end of my time. So there's two other things I want to just quickly touch on, if that's okay.
No,
I'm just curious what that era was at Aardman as you went towards the end of the 1990s. That, I mean, it just seemed to be such a joyous patch of productivity, just in terms of the stuff you were doing, and also doing a bunch of stuff that no one had told you whatsoever how to do. And I mean, I read stories of when you were doing Chicken Run, you basically didn't have enough animators, so had to set up a course at the local college to quickly educate the people to bring them in. You were that level of building stuff from scratch. What was that time like for you? Was it as exciting to you as it was to read about, or was it just like round the clock stress?
Oh yeah, no, it was both really. Well, there was lots of stress, but it was exciting, very exciting, because we're expanding. So it was, and it was trying to, in a way that I suppose the stress was, it was exciting that we were making feature films and telling stories at full length. That was a massive step up, after doing A Close Shave. Yeah. Which was in a way a sort of test really as to whether we could deliver, with a bigger crew and everything. And in fact, we were talking to Disney about a feature film before Close Shave, but it never happened. And then I remember Colin from the BBC saying maybe he should make another short film. It's on a bigger budget and a more tighter schedule, just to make sure as a studio you feel able to deliver such a thing.
Interesting.
It was a testing ground for that, really.
Because I was going to ask you about that. There's only a 2-year turnaround from Wrong Trousers to Close Shave.
Yeah.
That sounds like hell.
And A Close Shave moved up from like 2, actually there were more than 2 animators. There was some, Peter Lord did a couple of shots and another guy. Arrow did a couple of shots, but then Close Shave moved up to 8 animators, and I was directing, but I was getting little time to animate because of that. And also because more people were doing Wallace, we invented this system with I don't know if we invented it, but we pioneered it, where we replace the mouths. So we have pre-made plasticine mouths, but it makes it a lot quicker for the animator to re-sculpt the mouth every time. If the different syllables are all pre-made. But they did it on Nightmare Before Christmas with the whole head of Jack Skellington before that. Yeah. But so I can't remember what I'm saying now.
Well, I don't think it's any secret that we're talking, and I'm dragging you away from making a new Wallace and Gromit production now. But also, I'm conscious that that the last time I spoke to you was on Early Man, and you were talking about the joy of Early Man was coming up with a whole brand new collection of characters from scratch and finding out all their backgrounds, finding their look, and you just seem to be in a gleeful place when you were talking about that. And then conversely, you've also talked about when you return to Wallace and Gromit, there's fun going back to a play set where some of that character work is done, that you don't have to quite do that 10 minutes of intense work at the start to explain. I mean, the opening of Early Man is Ray Harryhausen and a half, isn't it? So I'm just kind of wondering where your happy place is now, and what's the bit that you most enjoy doing? And I appreciate it. I'm asking you mid-production, so that's probably the worst time to ask it. But where we find you and what's giving you the spark?
Well, I love all aspects, really. To be honest, I love coming up with ideas. Coming up with gags, the story. Story ideas. The fundamental story ideas. What that initial germ of an idea that makes you go, "Yes, we've got to make this," and then on storyboarding, the filmmaking, when it becomes a movie, and the storyboards and where you lay down how you're going to tell the story, the character, developing the characters, recording voices. It's all very exciting because it's all slowly coming together, and it's all conspiring to one thing in the end.
So, do you have a favourite bit of that process? Because it sounds like it always starts with a drawing for you, or it starts with a notepad. Nothing more advanced than that.
Yes, it very much is that, and I do love that bit. And in some ways, it would be easier if I could just come up with stuff and then walk away, give it to somebody else. But it's making it then, and it's making it how you want it. That's the difficulty. I think like going back to that, the big challenge around the end of the 90s and onwards was that what we had before that was a very much the auteur, in a small cottage industry, and films are made exactly how you want them because you're so hands-on. And I think when we got bigger, it was a case of how do we keep that auteur feeling and hands-on, and yet do this on a more industrial scale. And that was the big challenge, because we didn't want it to look, to suddenly become bland or corporate, or it had to feel like one person has made it, really, so that the style is consistent and authentic, and and it feels still handmade.
Well, again, I don't think anyone doubts that at all, really. If I can ask one last thing just before, and you've been very generous with your time. I mean, we are here, 33 decades of the wrong trousers. Just give us a snapshot of how you reflect on that now. Do you? I mean, is you as big a fan of it as the rest of us?
Well, I am. I am thrilled when people refer to it. And at first it was a shock when people who are 25 would come up to me and say, "I grew up with the wrong trousers," and I was like shocked that it was yesterday. How come you're that old saying you grew up with it? I can't believe how much time has gone by. It still feels like yesterday, really. But I'm very proud of it because I feel like it was a high point. no, I'm proud of other films we've done since then, and very proud. But there was something about that film that everything just worked. It just clicked. There was a lot of real strokes of originality in it. That even if I say so myself, I'm not claiming responsibility. There's a whole team, and lots of people are helpful in criticising and helping it get where it is for all sorts of different disciplines. But there's just something really worked, and it was a story that really breathed, and it's had its own sense of itself. And it was confident, and a lot of the time we didn't know what we were doing. I think that's part of it. And I remember feeling got this giant idea that this kind of slow burn heist suddenly breaks into this Tom and Jerry train top cowboy type train, highly exhilarating train chase. How will that go? Will it go down, or is it just going to catch people too unawares and confuse them, or what? And but it didn't. It worked. So
I mean, the only thing I could ever fault the wrong trousers for was the BBC video charged $8.99 for a half-hour video, which at the time I thought was outrageous until I wore the train chase bit out on it. I was just like, I don't begrudge you a penny of that.
Yes.
Nick Park, you've been so generous with your time. I could talk to you forever. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. It's been really interesting. Thanks, Simon. Yeah, cheers.
What a man. What a man. That brings to the end of my conversation with the wonderful Nick Park. Wallace and Gromit, The Wrong Trousers, as well as several other Wallace and Gromit films, are available on the BBC iPlayer service at the point this is being recorded. And as he hinted, and as you can probably tell, we couldn't really get into, Nick Park is hard at work on the latest Wallace and Gromit adventure, which is going to be arriving next year. And with that, I'm going to leave you in peace. There's nothing really I can say to top what he's been talking about. So I just want to thank you for listening and thank you for your support. If you like this podcast, please do leave ideally a hugely positive review and subscribe to it if you don't mind doing so. You can find more from what we're up to at Film Stories at filmstories.co.uk, and our print magazines are at store.filmstories.co.uk. And one little plug as well, if you're really interested in the stories behind the individual Wallace and Gromit films, might I recommend a podcast called Verbal Diorama, hosted by a friend of Film Stories, Em, and she went into each of those Wallace and Gromit tales individually in separate podcast episodes. Those are well worth a listen. But I think that's enough from me. Thank you as always for listening. Thank you for your time. I'll be back soon with your regular episode of Film Stories. Look after yourselves. Bye-bye.